Good evening, Resident Evil enthusiasts. This night is a dark one. I hope you've made it inside by now. I am here, once again, to share with you some more thoughts, theories, and insights on Resident Evil 8 Village. Tonight, we will be exploring Romanian folklore, creatures, and mythology, and how it inspires what we have witnessed in the Resident Evil 8 trailer. We will be exploring the legend that is read in the intro of the trailer regarding a girl searching for berries in the forest. Let us examine this story's parallel in Romanian folklore, as well as the significance of infants, imagery of ritual sacrifice, the three women in black, and many other key concepts. This will be pretty comprehensive, so be sure to check out the timestamps in the description to find what you need. So much of my excitement and investment in Resident Evil Village lies in the fact that its inspirations are deeply embedded within classic Romanian folklore to a rather faithful degree. So many of the concepts we have witnessed in the Resident Evil Village trailer are almost directly paralleled by a classic folktale, creature, or superstition, to the point where there is no question really where Capcom's inspirations originally came from. Now, brace yourself, as this one's going to get creepy. Romania, a land often revered as the birthplace for all things dark, divine, and mystical. A nation that served as the battleground of many bloody conflicts between the warring Dacians and Romans, as well as the site of natural disasters, disease, and feral creatures. In the midst of all this chaos, Romanian folklore would emerge as a way to gain courage and understanding. Like many early civilizations, Romanians would often attribute their grave misfortunes to their own lack of faith in God, or to dark, mythical creatures with powers beyond that of a mortal being. Such attributions would spawn morals, customs, and belief systems, one of which embodies our first parallel between Romanian folklore and Resident Evil Village. This is actually in regards to the legend being read out loud in the first 30 seconds of the trailer, presumably by Mia Winters, with a brief dialogue with Ethan immediately after. She describes a girl who went to the forest to pick berries, but the forest greeted her with a dark, cold silence. The bush is empty, yet determined to find the berries, she broke free of her mother's grasp and ran into the forest deep. Now, allow me to enlighten you with the tale of Baba Dokia. Baba Dokia was actually a real historical figure, as she was a Dacian princess who became betrothed to the Roman Emperor Trajan. Thus, her legends originate from the wars between the Dacians and the Romans, which are the two early civilizations that forged Romania as a nation. The legend I want to share with you depicts Baba Dokia as the mother of the young Dacian god of love, Dragobete. Dragobete grew up a strong, healthy man. He longed to marry Lazarita, the older sister of hero Lazarel, against his mother's will. This planted a seed of malice and hatred in Baba Dokia's mind against Lazarita, and so she sought to make her daughter-in-law's life a living pain. Baba Dokia sent Lazarita to complete many impossible tasks. However, in each of these tasks, the impossible was made possible only through the work of God. One day, Baba Dokia sent her daughter to gather wild ripe berries from the forest, although she already knew that berries did not grow in the winter and that this would be impossible. However, she told her daughter not to return home without the berries, and so Lazarita proceeded into the icy, cold forest, forced to find the berries. Lazarita wept and suffered, realizing the hopelessness of what she had embarked upon. How exactly was she supposed to find berries on the empty bushes of a cold winter forest? Only through the help of God would such a thing be possible. And so, God disguised himself as an elder and approached Lazarita in the forest. He gave her the right berries, which Lazarita graciously accepted, and gave them to her disbelieving mother-in-law, Baba Dokia. Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? How appropriate that the tale being read in the opening holds such a strong parallel to this classic legend in Romanian folklore. However, there are a couple slight discrepancies between the two, and it seems Capcom's version is a slight reimagining of this tale to avoid using it directly, as very little of it is changed overall. The tale in the intro of the Resident Evil 8 trailer mentions that the young girl goes with her mother to pick the berries, rather than being forced to go alone, and upon witnessing the cold embrace and empty bushes of the forest, the daughter escapes her mother's grasp to go and find the berries, rather than being coerced by her mother to do so. Interestingly, the classic tale implies that the only way to acquire these berries in the winter is through the help of God, and while Lazarita feels hopeless in her task, the young girl described in the trailer is consumed with utter determination. Where did this determination come from exactly? Was it because of something she saw? If so, what did she see? Did she see her own vision of God that could give her the berries in this Resident Evil universe? What exactly would that parallel to? Perhaps a hallucination through work of the occult? Or perhaps a BOW creature capable of creating such a hallucination in Resident Evil? The symbolism of baby Dragobete runs very deep in this parallel as well, as he is the symbol of a warm spring, and his mother Babadokia symbolizes the end of a harsh winter. In Romanian legends, rebirth happens between dark and light, war and peace, winter and spring. All the infants in this trailer seem to symbolize the grand rebirth of something long forgotten. Perhaps the moldy fetus insignia, which is likely a symbol of Ethan's infected baby, represents the rebirth of Umbrella through its new figureheads, new viruses like the E-Type virus from Resident Evil 7, and perhaps all the infants shown in the trailer are also tied to the game's vampire influences, as we'll cover in depth in just a moment. I am ecstatic to say this is merely the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Romanian folklore inspirations in Resident Evil Village. Let us dive into the next parallel and visit the gate mural one more time. Here we have the gate mural once again. Unlike in the last couple of videos, let's focus this time on the image engraved on the left side of the mural. Here we could see several bodies being impaled on large spears or stakes, with one figure who seems to be shouting in emotional outcry, as if in zealous praise of such a grisly ritual. This is strongly inspired by Vlad Tepes III. Vlad III, or Vlad the Impaler, was notorious for his merciless rule over Wallachia, Romania. After defeating his opponents in the battlefield, his favorite method of execution was impaling their bodies on large stakes to strike fear into his opponents. He loved the excruciating deaths of his enemies, and was even rumored to sit in the fields and drink their blood as they were impaled. This same violent imagery of the Dracula style of impalement is showcased in this very brief scene of the trailer, in which a large beast resembling the executioner from Resident Evil 5 jumps down from the roof. In the lower right corner of this shot, you can see another corpse brutally impaled on a stake, and it seems to rile up the other werewolf-like creatures, as if praising and celebrating this act of execution together. Vlad's influences ushered in a huge series of folklore and literature of vampires, including Bram Stoker's Dracula. But who is the parallel to Vlad in this case? Before we dive into the game's inspirations taken from Vlad and the Dracula novel, of which there are actually several, let's also take a quick look at the top and the right side of this gate mural. On the very top portion of this mural, it seems more figures are readying their spears or stakes to impale victims, just as Vlad would prefer. On this right side, we have a sea of hands, supposedly reaching up and out of hell. There are several human bodies falling into the sea of hands, a common depiction of hell in many folklores. The most accurate parallel of this imagery in the real world is the bridge of the cycle of rebirth in the White Temple of Thailand. The hands shooting out of the ground in this context symbolize desire, which may be present in the form of any of the 7 sins. The bridge is in the middle of this sea of hands, and it represents the virtuous way forward, sacrificing worldly desires, a fundamental component of Buddhist belief. In the context of RE8's occultism and worship elements, this may represent the failure to submit to worship entirely, consequently being cast into a pit of horrific hands descending into hell. So Both of these sides of the mural appear to represent sacrifice and punishment, to punish those who do not revere abominations of this cult. This begs the question, though, does the mind control and cult mentality emerge from the village itself rather than being forced upon them by the virus? In Resident Evil 4, the Ganados were literally slaves to the command of Sadler due to Las Plagas, but Resident Evil 8 might have an element of genuine human veneration towards the creatures created by the new virus, as well as those 3 women or 4 women in the castle. What comes with it is an element of true free will and the ability to disobey. Could these murals and impaled corpses represent a villager's decision to stray from worship and its consequences? It can also read from left to top to right as a mural of impalement and death on the earth on the left and top, and a descent into hell on the right side, with the hands representing the sins the victim could not avoid. Beyond the gate, let's venture inside the castle. Here we see 3 vampiric women in black who look similar, but not the same, and this is the key to their implications. As mentioned earlier, Bram Stoker's Dracula novel has a couple of strong parallels in this trailer, and the strongest of which pertain to these 3 women. The Dracula novel describes the brides of Dracula as 3 women who entrance men with their seductive appearance and are provided victims to feed on by Dracula himself. Most of these victims are implied to be infants in the novel, and in terms of Resident Evil Village, these infants may actually be raised by the cult in the village for these 3 women to feast on. We know that many traditional vampires need something human and something with live flesh and blood to prey on to satiate their hunger. Just like the Resident Evil 4 cult of Las Plagas performed blood rituals and sacrificed their own to keep their organization running, this Resident Evil Village cult may be breeding or even inbreeding fresh infants for these vampiric figureheads to feed on, as Dracula's brides were implied to feast upon babies in the novel. And now I'll share this. Interestingly, in the novel, 2 of Dracula's brides have dark hair, while the 3rd distinctively has blonde hair. How appropriate, considering 2 of these 3 women in black in the trailer have dark hair, and the 3rd one to the far right of this image does in fact have blonde hair. Not only does this parallel to the original Dracula novel by Bram Stoker, but the exact hair colors also align with several variations and spin-offs of the original, such as the Dracula tape. It seems that in every one of these spin-offs and reimaginings, the blonde-haired bride is the senior of the 3 and the most outspoken. Why is that, and what does this mean for a blonde-haired vampire in Resident Evil Village? Not to mention, there are multiple Dracula reimagined tales where a 4th bride joins the fray, and a couple where the main character becomes the 4th bride at some point in the story. While I do think it is unlikely that Capcom would take such inspiration from a spin-off, this isn't out of the question for Ethan. I'll explain later. All of these women have bloody lips, of course, with one of them being named Olga, as Biohazard Declassified recently revealed from their playtest, and massive thank you to them, but I'm unsure if she's the blonde one out of the 3 in black. Olga uses a swarm of bees or insects to attack, and eventually gains the ability to morph into a giant spider, which is actually an adaptation that we've seen before in pop culture. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the new breed of vampires have the ability to shapeshift into a swarm of bees, as well as other animals. Olga seems to be an extension of this new breed that can shapeshift into swarms of bees, but this next part is even crazier. In the original Dracula novel, an inmate at Dr. Seward's lunatic asylum named Renfield is consumed with his delusional obsession of consuming living creatures in hope of obtaining their life force for his own vitality. He starts consuming insects, then begins feeding the insects to spiders as a cycle of accumulating more and more life, described by Dr. Seward as a life-consuming madman. What's so striking about this cycle of life and death is that Olga of Resident Evil Village seems to imitate this cycle of being consumed by the next appropriate life form, as she starts as a swarm of flies and then evolves as a spider that releases more insects, as stated by the playtests mentioned earlier. Well, given that Renfield's next step in the novel is to feed the spiders to birds, it makes me wonder if Olga, or one of the women in black, has a bird evolution to parallel this, evolving from insect to spider to bird. It's also crazy that Olga transforms from an insect to a spider, which also releases more insects. This implies that the life force that is being compounded upon by the insects and the spiders is strongly reminiscent of Renfield feeding the insects to the spiders and accumulating that life form in a very, very similar image. All three of the women in black seem to submissively follow the lead of the witch in white, who we are suspecting to be Alex Wesker in the body of Natalia, as stated in multiple of my previous videos. With the three vampires in black paralleling the brides of Dracula, it's quite fitting that the vampire in the white gown, presumably Alex, parallels Dracula himself. Let's piece this together. She is a count in a castle who controls 3 brides, all of which need to feed off of human blood as well, presumably from babies that their master provides them. Their master, the vampire lady in white, likely gains access to these babies through her control of a cult in the village. Beyond this, in Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula himself feeds on the woman Lucy's neck, leaving bite marks and sending her into death, and then of course sparks her transformation into a vampire. This is symbolic of the classic vampire phenomena that states in order to spawn a vampire from a vampire, the host must be of the opposite sex of the vampire. In the trailer itself, we see the white gown vampire feasting on Ethan's hand, a female vampire feasting on a male victim. That's right, opposite sexes, and this is presumably to infect Ethan with vampiric qualities as well. Since this is Resident Evil, I would imagine that this bite would transmit a new strain of virus to Ethan, perhaps to make him a bioweapon as well. Well, the scene is set. Let us see how this story progresses. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to those of you who have continued to support me through my in-depth analyses of Romanian folklore, the Wesker children, Franz Kafka, and all things Resident Evil. Special thanks to Mark5, Andre Novoa, for being my very first $2 supporter on Patreon. This means so much to me that anyone is willing to put forth money to support my content. I cannot express to you how happy that makes me. I will be putting the names of my Patreon supporters into my videos as a shout out, so if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me at the Patreon link in the description. Several viewers have privately messaged me regarding their love of my videos and continue to theorize with me personally, which I absolutely love, so don't be afraid to reach out to me. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time, as we will be examining the Pricolici, or werewolf inspiration in Resident Evil Village, its parallels to Romanian folklore, and any new information from the playtest or otherwise that deserves a deeper dive. I want to seriously thank all of you for being so supportive of my content lately. This has made me more excited to make in-depth Resident Evil content. I have also heard a few times from my viewers by now that they would be interested in the dramatic reading of horror stories, which is something I myself have been interested in as well for quite some time now. If you would like to see this type of content, feel free to say so in the comments. I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Perhaps, just as the night fades to black.